being in the medical space is hard enough as it is. But if you're having to do things that you didn't really sign up for, you don't become a doctor to have lots of admin, that will
Mm.
feel a lot more grueling and exhausting than the work that you're doing anyway, which is already some of the hardest work we have to do. We're seeing a new generation of tools whose job is pretty simple. It's to listen, to document, to route, and to free humans from the admin swamp. Hello, and welcome to the Changing Shapes podcast and our weekly segment, Wish I Thought of That. Hi, Hiba, how are you doing?
I'm good. I'm great. It's been a big week. I have really also loved the response to last week's episode, so I'm really gassed up by that, but also work-wise, it's been a big one, but it's been a strong one. So I'm feeling good. How are you feeling? How was your week?
Good, good. Well, the week's been busy, but the one thing that tangentially is close to what we're going to talk about today is our dog broke her toe, which was a bit dramatic. So we've been to the vet and everything. So since we're talking about medical things on medical apps on the next
Mm.
couple episodes, it sort of felt fitting that I was dealing with also looking at, yeah, documentation, sharing different data across vets and stuff like that, which was quite interesting. But yeah, if you do hear, she sounds a bit like a pirate. So I hope she stays on her bed and doesn't like, we don't hear her walking around the house. But she's fine. She's built like a tank. She'll be fine.
Bless. Poor thing.
But yeah, so I mean, today I wanted to talk to you about clinical health tech.
Okay, bet. Let's go. So what's on your mind?
So either you know this or you've seen this just in terms of healthcare. Clinicians today spend 30 to 50% of their time on admin, which
Mm.
that stat is crazy as it is. And there's a couple of reasons why that's increased over the last, many years. One of them is the explosion of data requirements. So for quality metrics, for coding, reimbursement rules, legal documentation, the legal documentation, there has been a shift to defensive medicine. So you need to document everything to protect yourself. There's the digitization of medicine. So there's more of a digital trace. There are more logs, and there's also more compliance. Patients have expectations that there's more communication and follow-up messaging, and hospitals are financially pressured to make sure that all this documentation exists. There's more auditing and reporting. So there's been a lot of shifts generally in the industry, and some good things can come from that. There's more structured data can lead to safer care, pattern recognition, more transparency, and that pattern recognition can mean earlier detection, and you can have better handoff and richer data sets. But there's also a downside. So I think there's a decrease of eye contact for screen contact. There's higher burnout because one of the causes for burnout, being in the medical space, is hard enough as it is. It's hard work and it's emotionally hard. There's long hours. But if you're having to do things that you didn't really sign up for, you don't become a doctor to have lots of admin, that will feel a lot more grueling and exhausting than the work that you're doing anyway, which is already some of the hardest work we have to do. And I think for patients as well, they can feel processed and less understood. So, in a way, we created a system where the more data you collect, the smarter the care, but also the dumber the experience. So, that's a bit of a paradox that I think we're kind of living through. And a lot of doctors are great at overcoming that and giving a great experience, but it's definitely seems like it's gotten a lot harder.
Yeah, I feel that. I think immediately what comes to mind is just like when you're just speaking with friends, and so on one side you have people that go and see doctors, and you have other people that are doctors, and I so rarely hear of an experience which is like, I'm so glad I went to the doctor. It was such a great experience, etc. And it's again, nobody has any doubt that doctors are extremely good at what they do and educated and smart and they're overworked. I think everyone can acknowledge that. But smarter the care, dumber the experience really resonates because, yeah, all I can say is whenever I've been asked for 101 pieces of information about myself, whether it's digitally or on a form, I have to fill the same form out 10 times at different points in my care. And I'm always just like, haven't you inputted my information once? Like, why do I have to give you my email address 5 times? And so, anyways, my level of experience with this is very much on the patient side where I'm just like, I hate this. And I want to avoid going to a doctor as much as possible. Not because I'm afraid of like there being problems and figuring them out, but really for me, the experience, I don't want to say the service experience because that it's a different thing, but just the process of going to the doctor and trying to get them to get all the core information about you and then getting on with the program often just feels so tedious. And it adds an extra hour, hour and a half, usually when you are visiting a doctor or a specialist for the first time. So
100%. And I think the bureaucratic overhead of it, right? Like not wanting to go to the doctor because of the bureaucratic overhead is such a core experience, especially here in Germany, where, my experience of that is as well, that the amount of paperwork I have to get through and communicating also to the insurance company and all that, that doesn't feel like it's the bit that I've signed up for when I want to get healthcare. And if I transpose how much it is for me as the one patient, whenever I go into my local GP's office and I see even just the staff that are there handling all the admin, I can't imagine how much more that is for them. And they have to deal with the different insurance companies and everything else.
yeah,
It really does add up a lot. So if it's too much for me, I can't imagine how much it is for them who deal with multiple patients and much further levels of complexity. And they still take the time to figure out how to get an appointment for me at a specialist when I need it. And they still make me feel like I'm treated like a human, not a data point.
totally. So how and you know what? I think that's fair to say. I think the definitely the administrative, I'm here complaining as a patient, but definitely the administrative burden of a clinic, practice, hospital cannot imagine like the level of complexity that is in those workflows and also in terms of data security and whatnot. So I'm curious, how, in your mind, what are the best practices that make it easier for doctors and practitioners to manage all of this admin? Is there like a technical solution? Is there a design solution that you've been kind of thinking on?
Yeah. So I've been looking at what different areas can kind of do with some improvements. And there's three main areas that I would look at in this section of health tech. And generally we're seeing a new generation of tools whose job is pretty simple. It's to listen, to document, to route, and to free humans from the admin swamp. And so the three areas would be documentation tools, then there's practice operation system tools, so Practice OS, and a Uber for care logistics kind of software. And just to name an example for each to kind of bring those a bit to life, for documentation tools, there's an incredible AI scribe tool here as a startup in Germany, which is a YC backed nursing documentation tool called Voice. And you heard about them or you know
Yeah.
them.
Yeah.
They're incredible because what they do is they save about 30% of documentation time. They use voice for structured notes, and that leads to electronic health records. It's designed for real life shifts, not theoretical workflows. And they've thought about making sure that people whose first language might not be German, who are here to help people, and they can dictate much more quickly then they can type and then just get that information out there and find the information quickly, speeding things up. Because the last thing I want, or anybody wants, is for people who are caretakers to be spending loads of time in their week doing the documentation. Every time bit of time that they can free up for the patient is really important.
Okay. I feel like I've heard this value proposition many times before, you know? Let us free time. Let's give you back your time so you have time to spend on the things that matter. I feel like I've heard that before. I know Boys is doing something right because of especially the stat that you mentioned, 30% improvement. And I've also anecdotally heard that it is genuinely a great tool. So what in your mind is helping them actually deliver on that promise?
Yeah. So the way they structure their features, that it's also context dependent on what I'm doing is really helpful. So for example, if you have, for example, an emergency situation, they have a tool where you can just wrap up the most important information and hand it over to the emergency team that needs to help. So understanding the different contexts of how people will be using the tool. If I'm in a room and I need to document somebody's injury or somebody's illness, a status update, their blood pressure, all these things are easy to find and easy to get to when you need it quickly. But what I think on a higher level in terms of design that's really important with tools like this is that going back to the design principle of don't make me think, right? I don't want to be thinking about how to use this tool and staring at my iPhone or my smart device, my tablet, and trying to
Mm.
figure out what was I supposed to do here? Where's this bit of information? It needs to be that I can just get it done and then face the patient again. So the more time I have facing the patient and the quicker I can just get what I need to do in the right context done, the better the tool is going to be functioning.
Totally. Question. I think in all of our chats, I think I'm gonna say on almost every chat, I think I've heard you say, "Don't make me think." And the thing with that is it totally makes sense. Like, I just right away, as soon as you said it, the more time the doctor is or the nurse or whoever is spending looking at the patient and talking to the patient, the better. You don't want them to be like they and the patient don't want to be like going through trying to figure out where stuff is and deal with like a janky system for sure. How does one when solve for the fact that there are so many different ways in which people try to find information and they're trying to navigate a system and I don't know, just come up with a result that works so universally well. Of course, everybody there's going to be some outliers, but it sounds like Voice has really nailed the don't make me think kind of like principle and they've made it work for people in a medical space where they're coming from so many different backgrounds, languages, contexts, trainings, etc. So, in your opinion, if you had to like hypothesize, what do you think they did, or generally, what do you notice teams that adopt this principle really well do so that it really reduces the cognitive lift of using the app or the tool?
Absolutely. The core of it for me always runs down to really understand the workflow, the human workflow that somebody is in. Like really, really understand it. And what am I doing? And what are the different situations that might come up? So what we do is we dive into a workflow to the level of that we actually shadow somebody in the process of what they're doing and we see what's going on. And we want to see as much as possible because you'll see a regular situation, but that regular situation often gets interrupted and something else happens. Then having a designer who deeply understands how to create information architecture, because if you're in a patient situation, you don't want to be thinking about, oh, where was that thing again? It needs to be, oh yeah, obviously it's here. Obviously I understand through visuals, through icons, through words to navigate to the point that I am. So you have your main arc of what I'm doing. I'm going to see a patient in a care home and I need to document, their update. I need to surface the right information from last time. We need to understand what is important for you as the caretaker or as the doctor. What information do you need to see to get the quickest summary so that you really know who you're seeing right now? Because the mental load of seeing so many patients in one day, let's make that as easy as possible. Every time I go to see my doctor who sees thousands of patients, I feel like I'm his only patient because he knows everything about me so quickly, right? They have a skill that that's immense. Let's create tools that make it easier for them to work with that skill and make you feel like a human, present the right information that they told us that we know is right, and then let them navigate other things with ease, let them navigate features with ease and further information with ease.
I think in this medical context, one which I don't have a lot of hands-on experience in, by the way, I find what everything you're saying really resonates. In other contexts, other products I've worked on, there's always I found there's this tension between the user or the target audience. They might be so opinionated that like this thing is the most important thing. And you have to kind of take some of that user input with a grain of salt because they might be really focusing on one micro problem, not realizing the larger kind of feedback loops that it creates. And it's one of those things where sometimes a user does not, of course, a user knows what they need, but they don't always know how to express it. And so they might get really bogged down in the feature, like, I need to get this information in one click. How do you deal with that? Because I can imagine doctors are quite opinionated, and any medical practitioner is like, me personally, I need this and this and this because it's the thing I access most frequently, but the next person might need something else. So, yes to everything you said. How do you split the difference with what they tell you they need, but also the larger picture that you have a better grip on because you're interviewing a wider group of people?
So our goal is to reduce friction and anchor behavior in context. So what we do is we don't want to really hear what people want. I mean, it's the overused, if you ask somebody what they want the faster horse, not the car, right?
Sure.
In a way, yes, we need to understand. And I do ask, what do you need? But I want to immerse myself in your world and then step away and think of, with people who are designers and engineers, how can we solve that without the ballast of hearing what that solution should be? We create that, prototype that, put it into the real world context, and get information again from a diverse set of potential users to really understand, did that work? Did it improve? Because the best thing the thing that I chase isn't solving the I wanted to do this. The thing that I chase is I didn't even think of that. That's even better than what I imagined. And that's the point where we really know that we've succeeded when we get that. And that's how we try to set our goal to that point.
Totally. I love that. And I think my equivalent of that is when somebody tries something out for the first time, they're like, why hasn't it always been this easy? Like, duh. Like, of course it should work like this. And you're like, yes, nailed it. I love that nuance. And it is hard to parse through the inputs that people are giving you and be like, okay, this person is suggesting a solution. I'm going to just put that on the side. What's the core kind of insight behind it, though? I'm going to hold on to that. I find, or I'm curious if in this context it applies, but sometimes when people give you input, they also think that they're giving you their shopping list, their wish list. And then when you come back to test with them or to get their feedback, they're just kind of like, but I don't see it formatted in this way, or I don't see it accessible in the way I expected. And they get hung up. It's an expectations management thing. So there's something around managing expectations, building trust that like, hey, I will find a way to solve your problem for good. And if you don't manage that well, it can come back to you as like, you're not really listening to me. And that's I find like we want what you said, but the fine line, and a lot of times what product people fall on the wrong side of, or designers fall on the wrong side of, because even within a product team, sometimes the product manager is saying, do it like this. And the designer's like, I'm going to look at the whole problem. I've been guilty of it myself.
Yeah.
And yes, sometimes you get into a situation of, this is not what I asked for. How do you manage that?
So we go down to fundamentals of how big is this problem really for you? And therefore, how big of a solution should this be? And once we really understood that, because it's easy to get caught up in, a fascinating problem that you find interesting, and then you might go too far. So really first get aligned on where do we stand together on how big this problem is.
I like
And
that.
then when we go away and design it, we find different points of together speaking about the problem, going away and saying, so here's how we understood the problem. Here are some things that you've shown us that are a barrier, but you haven't really expressed. So we really try to go deeper and say, is this also a problem for you? And showing deeper understanding than maybe they had themselves of what's going on in their context. And then taking them along the way and showing them, showing wireframes is important because like this is the way that we're inching to it. And then it depends on the type of person that you're speaking with to see, do we need to reiterate of here's what the problems that we're solving? Sometimes if somebody's working on many different things, we need to kind of take a step back when we're representing and say, here's where we were and here are the problems we're solving, and show the logical consequence of this is how it was phrased, but actually it'll lead only so far. But if we solve it this way, it'll solve much broader array of things that you've shown us that we weren't even maybe here to solve in the first place. So really For me, it's about sitting next to each other and making sure that people understand we're solving this together. And our background in startup really helps with that because we tend to enmesh and make sure that we have a culture of we're all solving this together, even though we might be the agency and you're the client. And we're going to really roll up our sleeves and work this out together and understand your expertise as the client is deeper than ours. Our expertise is here, and how do we kind of come to a conclusion together? And sometimes you might miss the mark, but then it's important to know to have an intuition on, well, this is going further away from what we spoke about. Let's have this conversation first of how we're thinking about this, and we see a shift that could be really valuable, and this is why. Before we go too far ahead, I mean, a lot of it is also what I would say is common sense and diplomacy to make sure that people aren't, don't have a negative surprise, even if you think it might be a nice one.
Underrated skill set. It's not everyone doesn't come with that in their starter kit. So I think that's very, very good advice. I had another question for you. So when we started, you said there were three kind of aspects of admin tools
Yes.
that you believe is really essential to make, especially in the medical space, making practitioners' lives easier, better, allowing them to actually perform the best care that they can. So we talked about documentation with voice. You also mentioned Practice OS, which I'm really intrigued by, and also then just the logistics side of it. I think the logistics side of it, I have a pretty good sense of what kinds of tools and workflows we're talking about, but I'd love to like learn a little bit more about Practice OS.
Yeah. So the example that I chose for that is also another German startup called Nelly Solutions, and they describe themselves as the digital front door for clinics. And what they simplify is onboarding. So, like you were saying about the filling in of information when you come the first time to that doctor, getting signatures and invoices and payments, reducing friction for clinicians and patients, and just getting all that admin side done, which in Germany is a huge amount of bureaucracy around this. And so getting these things sorted and having it done in a way where you have a sort of direct to consumer style of user interface design to make the work much easier really helps. Another thing that I think is really interesting that you can then lead into there is education. So they have education tools where if you want to explain to somebody what their diagnosis means and what the context of that is for their body, you actually have tools there to present that. Maybe not everybody's interested in that, but for me, one of the things I love about my doctor is that I can ask him, well, what does that mean? And he's got like a double doctorate. He's also a biologist and a medical doctor, and he explains it really well. And I feel more empowered, but also more understood. And having a tool that facilitates that I can actually show a diagram, doctors will have that and they'll show things, but having the tool that facilitates that, it improves that human connection that I have to my doctor, and I feel more seen and more taken care of. So there's the admin side. That means I can just get things done and it's not a headache for me, like you were mentioning at the beginning. And then there's the care side where I can actually get more information. And what I think would be super exciting to see as well is how can I continue the care after I get out the door? So seeing if there's ways to, if my doctor suggests I should be drinking less coffee, not that I'm speaking from experience or anything here, then that I can also document that I have reduced my coffee intake a little bit. And not necessarily that he has to know that, but in a way, for me, it feels good that he is still taking care of me outside of the door, even though it's just the software. Still makes me
Mm,
feel taken care of a bit more, and also makes sure that I don't forget what he told me when I was in the room.
mm. I I like that. And actually, I also know Nelly because one of my doctors was just like, "Hey, could you please finish like registering?" We're trying to like switch over, and I got like several reminders, and I was like, "Oh, what's this?" But okay, no, okay, now I understand. I understand why they're doing it. Um, I think again, what's occurring to me as we talk about these different tools, it very much is that these are not new problems, but there's something about how these companies or products are approaching the problem that's a little bit different because I have also heard really great things about Nelly. And I think my takeaway from everything you've been explaining is that it is that deep understanding of the problem area and an investment of time in truly building empathy that is setting them apart, because these features are not, with no shade, these everything you're describing is not particularly novel or like earth shattering, but it's the combination, and it's the thinking about the overall patient experience that a doctor wants to be able to support on somebody on at scale, that totally changes what features they choose to prioritize. So I think that's also an important takeaway. It's these days you can build anything. You can literally copy a whole other app and brand it differently and say it's a new product, but it's not really. But it comes down to what you choose to prioritize. It's more about that than rather than being like the most inventive, innovative that you can be, because that has novelty factor. But especially in the medical space, I can understand that if you go too far in this onto the side of like flashy and inventive, that can also make people a little bit hesitant to try and adopt your tool or to give it a try with their patients, because there's such a precedence of like, yeah, the kind of experience people expect and whatnot. So yeah, that's what comes to my mind when I heard you talk about Nelly, because it sounds really good.
Yeah. And I think, with these tools, the main thing to think about is to focus on the human connection, right? The human connection should be the KPI, and success means that you're having more meaningful conversations per day, right? And I think making sure that these tools allow for creating small empathy pockets, because if you're in a situation where you need to speak to a doctor, you're probably feeling vulnerable, you're probably feeling scared, and having a human in front of you who's there to also provide some human support is so important. But I think the broader and bigger impact that I see with the emergence of these tools and the connection of having a lot of this data digitized is early detection and pattern intelligence. I think that's something I want to talk about more in a separate episode, but just as a maybe as a teaser, when admin becomes more structured and we have access to this kind of data and a wealthier amount of data, these tools can come together. And one of my favorite examples, just to lead straight into it, is See the Signs. They're a brilliant company and startup in the UK that has AI that detects early cancer risk based on patterns and symptoms and patients' behavior.
Mm.
They base it on structured data. And the sort of core of what they do is that they have a backend system for NHS doctors where an algorithm finds patterns that a busy GP might miss and suggests, oh, this is a pattern that could potentially be a higher risk for cancer. So we recommend doing some further screening. And they've had a huge impact. They've had 65,000 early detections already. And this, for me, is the strength of making it easier to document things. And then in the back end, have things that can analyze and make suggestions of this is worth checking. And I think that as the broader impact of, yes, there's more admin to do. Let's make that admin as simple as possible so that people can be human, and then let machines look at patterns to help in the way that See the Signs is doing.
I love that. Wow, 65,000 early detections. That's insane. And also I have heard of See the Signs too. And I think, to kind of conclude, that admin should be simple, right? It doesn't have to be painful. We all know we need to do admin. We know you need a certain amount of information about me to treat me. Like, we know that if I have a sugars problem, I need to consistently track my sugar levels, because the doctor needs to know that and I need to know that. We all need to do admin when it comes to anything medical, but how can we just make that process as simple as we can? Because there's so many adjectives, right? Admin shouldn't be painful. Admin shouldn't feel like a drag. Like, all the branding words and whatnot. But I think the way you said it just is so, like, it should be simple. It should be so simple. If it's feeling convoluted, if it feels like you have to give too much explaining text, onboarding training, and it's not simple enough, like coming back to voice, to just guide yourself through the steps, you need to go back to the design stage, go back until you get it right, so that each step feels as simple and as small and manageable as possible, because nobody wants to look at like a 3-page form and have to do that, yeah, every other time you come and see the doctor and vice versa. So beautifully put.
But and yeah, I agree. I think if we design these tools well, then healthcare can become more human and not less. And that, I think, should be the goal for anybody designing these tools, but also for the businesses and practices that implement these tools into their systems to make sure that we don't just have more time to do more admin, but actually that we have more time to provide more of a human experience in a situation that can be really hard for some people.
You know what? You were right. This was way more interesting than the name led me to. I'm totally joking. I knew you were going to take us to an interesting place, and I love all the tools that you mentioned, the platforms rather that you mentioned. I think they all are really onto something, and like I've maybe mentioned before, I think whatever industries you tend to one tends to be focused on, it's always a good idea to just broaden your references and just look and see what people are doing in other spaces, why it's working, and see what you can bring into your own work. So, yeah,
And yeah, and these tools impact us in ways even if we might not be using them directly, they'll still impact all of us. So, it's important to look at them and see how they're evolving. And I'm really excited about the space. So it's been great talking to you about it.
I'm enjoying learning about it. All
All right.
right.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time today. And
Pleasure
yeah,
as
looking forward to the
always.
next one.
See you at the next one.
Thank you.